Okay, guys, welcome to the second episode of the Late Night Nerd. And the person I've got with me is the man, the myth, the legend. You want to introduce yourself?
Happy to, man. Steve Orlando, writer all over the place. Tons of stuff at DC. I was exclusive there for 4 years, but now I'm free and freelance, working all over the place. Aftershock, Image Comics, heavy metal, stuff at Marvel you know about that's delayed, stuff at Marvel you don't know about that's not delayed due to the pandemic, and everywhere in between. I am hustling. I'm hustling in 2020, so you've probably seen my work somewhere, and
We
maybe
all
you,
go, we all gotta be nowadays.
no doubt, no doubt.
Well, my first question will be kind of on topic with what you just said. um, what's the difference between working in more indie comics from working in the mainstream like DC and Marvel?
Well, the main thing is who owns the characters, and they're two different things. Like, one is not better than the other. They're just different. When you're working at Marvel and DC, you're delivering a story, but very well, unless you're a fool, that Batman is going to go on for decades and decades after you leave.
Yeah,
And so will all of the Marvel and DC IP. So when you're working there, you're kind of like, it's kind of like, oh, here's this beautiful monolith that I've discovered, and I'm going to get to put. And by the way, it's a privilege to put a couple more bricks on that mosaic. I said monolith, but I should have said mosaic. So I'm going to get to add a couple more pieces to that mosaic, and know that, God, 10, 20, 50, 100 years, those pieces are still going to be there, and it's going to be so much bigger. And that's sort of what working on these classic characters, these classic IPs is like, because they're incredibly personal to you if you grow up reading superhero comics, and at the same time, like, you approach them as a creator and you put a lot of heart and work and passion and love into them, but you are delivering something that's going to be part of something much larger, and that, when you step away, it's going to stay there. So that's got to be in your mind. When you are doing originals, you're starting the mosaic. You own everything top to bottom. So it sort of flips the dynamic. You're not adding to this like narrative that is going on 100 years long with these characters. You're starting your own narrative, and you're starting something brand new, and there's no rules, there's no restrictions. And when a character's 100 years old coming up on it, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of restrictions, and that's understandable.
true.
So the challenge then is to do something new within those guidelines, and do something new within the sort of perceptions of what makes like a Spider-Man story or a Batman story or Superman story. You're getting to set those perceptions and set that world up when you're doing originals. So they're both stimulating and challenging in completely different ways. And that's why I love them both. Everybody, frequently it's said, there's not many things more intimidating than a blank page. And so that's something that will happen when you're doing an original, because you have to create the rules and the guidelines. But on some level, when you sign up to do any type of big two story, what a Batman story is. And so, the question becomes, how can you do something new with that? How can you subvert that character? How can you provide people something interesting and different than what they've seen before, and still make sure that you are telling a Batman story?
Very well put. How are you managing to stay sane in 2020?
I work a lot, which sounds like a joke, but it does keep me, it gives me an outlet. Even if I'm not writing about the pandemic, everything that's on your mind does go into your work. So while I'm not doing a book about COVID-19 or something like that,
That would be depressing.
the stresses of your life. I mean, hey, Michael Bay just really is just.
I know. I just saw that the other day, and I was like, to be honest, who's gonna watch that?
I mean, a lot of people,
But everybody will.
um,
But who wants to?
but yeah, exactly. And so the thing is like, you're not necessarily always directly talking about what's going on in your life, but you're indirectly talking about it, because the things on your mind and the stresses and what's important to you in a moment always goes into your work. So, I've been doing a lot. And not even all of it is announced. So much of it is unannounced. But I've got a young adult book coming out this year. I've got a horror book, or next year probably. I've got a horror book that I've been working on this year. I have something inspired both by Silver Age Superman and my watching of Neon Genesis Evangelion when I was at the gym, back when you could go to the gym regularly. So the way I've been keeping sane, from a work sense, is that I've been taking the fact that, we are all stuck in, and, as a freelancer, I'm privileged in that my life didn't change so much. Yes, I don't get to do my one thing where I saw people every day, which is go to the gym, but I've been working at home and making my own schedule for 6 years. So that's not something that's totally new, and I'm lucky in that. So what I've been trying to do is, help people who don't have that experience and are sort of struggling. My boyfriend moved in. That's certainly new for him, working from home, because he's a teacher. So he's used to being in front of people for the most part.
That's really nice.
So we're doing a lot of work, and then there's new rituals as well. It sounds ridiculous, but you have to build new rituals in. I bought both I started doing both like mental detox yoga for when I feel one way, and then for when I feel another way, I bought a punching bag for my basement. So that kind of sums up 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, but it must be really nice that you get, a bright side of 2020, that you would get to spend more time together.
He probably would have moved in either way. Not to put myself over too much, but I'm all right. But it is nice, it is nice having it happen this year. Stressful getting it done, obviously, in the middle of a pandemic. But
yeah, obviously.
Now that we're here, it's all good.
Okay, next question is there anything you can tell me about the future of the Commanders in Crisis series?
Oh man, I can tell you a lot. Basically, that is the book where I'm doing all the things that for 4 or 5 years at DC, everything I couldn't do, everything that was too risky or too strange or take your pick, it's all going into that book. So you're going to see a lot of new, strange ideas every issue. I think folks deserve to have their thoughts provoked every time they read a comic. I think they
love risky and strange.
I think people deserve to be challenged. So, and that's going to be both in concept and cultural critique, and obviously big blockbuster superheroics. And it's also going to be about the way we see a lot of superhero and comic book tropes. And so one of the things I'm excited to show people with the book, if they go on this journey with me, is just my point of view on a lot of the ways we talk about story and think about story, like the ways we think about the murder mysteries, the ways we think about time travel, the ways that we think about the multiverse, even concepts like good and evil. It really is concepts like truth. I want to really take a critical eye to it and make folks think about it in a way that excites them. Like, we're not here to be didactic. We're here to tell this big epic superhero story that also sort of makes you sit back and say, oh, like, I never thought about that way before. It's got to be both. The first one is just boring, and the second one is just like lacking all calories and narrative merit. So we got to thread the needle and give you something that has a lot of fun stuff blow up in ways you've never seen before, and also makes you consider some things that maybe you wouldn't consider if you didn't read the book.
Isn't that what all of the greats of comic books are about, making a great story, but also being a critique of the comic book genre?
If we're doing it right, yes, certainly.
I think you will.
Not every book has to be about books, but
yeah.
At the same time, like, I think it's hard to do something it's not about the moment. And, coming off of 4 years on an exclusive contract, I have a lot of opinions about the moment in comics. But, we aim to do both. I'm certainly not a structuralist like some of the greats. I love just sort of wild pop culture. So it's never going to be like, my books are not going to be the ones that necessarily like dig in really, really deep on craft from a visual storytelling standpoint, like something like Watchmen does, unless my artists do. But that's because I work in a much more collaborative way. My scripts don't, treat an artist like a slave. They treat them like an equal peer and co-creator.
That's
So
really good.
what we do though is, not to accidentally quote Peter Frampton there, but what we do is, yeah, like we will talk about and question why we've depicted things and seen things the way we always have in comics for the past 80 years, and does it really have to be that way? And hopefully that's what we think about when we read the book.
That's really great. Next question is, how did the idea for Commanders in Crisis come about?
I love big weird superheroes. Milk Wars was one of my favorite things I did at DC, getting to work with Gerard Way, getting to tell those Doom Patrol style stories where things were unusual and provocative. It was always going to be the first thing I did when I returned to Image. But the conceit of them being ex-presidents is really, to me, I'm fascinated and by the fact that people he would think would be enemies based on their political parties find a form of camaraderie after they leave the Oval Office because of this shared experience. Like Michelle Obama and W are famously friends at presidential events, even though they probably disagree in a shitload. And this is not an endorsement of like the sins of any of those people, but what interests me is just the stress and the fact that when you leave that office, there's really less than 10 people in the world that understand what you went through for 4 or 8 years.
Obviously.
I wanted to magnify that through the lens of a superhero event. So now you have like people who were in that office and had to lose their entire world to this multiversal crisis. And yeah, like they're the only ones in all reality, in every reality, that understand what the other is lost. And so I think that was just an incredibly powerful bond to tie a team together.
Really, really good stuff. Is there anything, I'm a big fan of your Batman Shadow run. Do you have any plans to work on something similar in the future?
I would love a solo run of the Shadow if I can ever track that down. I love doing Batman Shadow. I love doing Shadow Batman. He is my favorite like pulp and comics character. Martian Manhunter is my favorite DC character, but the Shadow is my favorite character. So I would do that in a second. I would love to do more with Riley. I would love to, but really like anytime that I could write the Shadow, I would jump in that ring again. We have our version, like our homage to the pulp characters is going to appear in Commanders in Crisis. So I do hope that we can do something with her as well once you guys meet her, probably later in the series, before issue 12. But whether or not we do that, I would still love to return to the original. I think the Shadow is such a primal, powerful character. He's not necessarily even super complex, but I think that what is there is, as I said, primal, and I think that that's key. Like he's a raw emotion type character.
Yeah.
And that makes him really easy to bounce off any time period. Like my favorite thing, the big thing about the Batman Shadow series is we were not going to set it in the past because, some folks think he only works in the 30s, but no, the core of that character works in any time, in any place. And I think that is something I'd love to explore more.
I mean, plus he's basically an eternal character.
Yes, and he's mysterious. I mean, that's the key. He's truly unknowable. And that was, when Scott and I started talking about the plot and I started doing the script, that's what we talked about. Like, you have the greatest detective in Batman, and then you have someone who truly cannot be known. There's no amount of detective work that Batman could do to discover what he wants about the Shadow. And in that, you have the ultimate, we love to say Batman's just a man, but how often does he actually face his fallibility and his mortality? Like, he's perfect. He always has an answer, but that's not really being human. Having to accept that you don't have the answers that's human. And so that's what we wanted to do with that book.
Yeah, I really loved it. It was, it's probably one of my favorite runs of comic books in the past 10 years.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's just really great stuff. Um, I'm a self-taught screenwriter. Any advice you can give me and other writers as to how to get there?
Well, I mean, if you can break into things outside of comics, please tell me how to get there. But I'll give you the advice that my mentor gave me when I was younger. You know, I'm pretty open about the fact that my friend Steve Siegel, who, you know, went on to, I mean, semi left comics to get into animation and create Ben 10. He helped me with writing from the time I was like 12 years old. And the first thing he said to me, and he's always very brusque. I describe him as lovingly brusque. And the first thing he said to me was, you know, write every day, even if it's not good, like form a routine and write every day and treat it like a job or it'll never be one. And, you know, I remembered that for the 20 years, basically, that it took me to break in after that. And, you know, it doesn't always work out. You know, sometimes life gets in the way. But folks tend to romanticize the creative arts, and they are romantic. And the ideas and the passion is romantic and real. But the implementation of them is still a job. And so I would say that when it comes to screenwriting, key to you to any type of creative field is going to be your ability to deliver. So take as long as you need forming an idea, outlining it, making sure it all fits. But once it comes time to write it, set a schedule for yourself and say you're going to do, even if it's just 4 pages a day, you know, and do that until it's done. And don't let anything get in the way, because that's what it's going to be like when you eventually do get in. And forming that routine around it, so vitally important to me. I mean, it's going to take, you know, learning story is a whole different thing. Learning characters is a whole different thing. And it's incredibly important. But now 6 years in, I've never missed a deadline. And that type of professionalism and reliability is so key. And it starts to demystify the process of writing. We tend to treat it, art is a little different than story. You know, there are parts to a story. Anything can be art. Like I was teaching a class at my old college, and anything can be art, but a story has parts. And so you do have to learn them and you have to implement them. And going forward, it makes it easier because you know the parts. And so you can apply, you know, whether it's a 3-act or 5-act structure, you can apply the basics of narrative, and it gets you writing and working faster. If we are, you know, there's a lot of folks that'll act like, you know, writing is like they have to enter some sort of trance. You know, they have to go out into a cabin in the woods and light candles and like take their clothes off and sit around for 4 days alone. And then maybe when they're in like a Gnostic state, they can start writing. And that's adorable, but it's also complete horseshit.
Yep.
The fact is like, yeah, that type of stuff does happen, but that's when you're coming up with the idea, when you're coming up with what you want to say. That's in the brainstorming and the pre-work period. But it's called pre-work because the rest is work. And so once you figure that out, you know, whatever you think is attainable until your next script sample is done, set a schedule, get it done. Don't let anything stop you, because that's what I did. You know, for 18 years, I would do like 2 to 4 new comic proposals every year. I would get critiques back from my mentor. He would tell me what wasn't professional and what was, and I would go back and fix it. And then finally, when everything was professional, he said, well, what do you want to do with this? I said, well, I'd love to publish it at Image, and he physically handed it to Image. You know, and after 18 years of doing that, it took 10 seconds, but that's because I was one of the few people. Every year he thought I would never come back, and I always did with a new idea, and I never stopped. So have that dedication, and don't psych yourself out about the actual physical writing process. All those things that people think about, like, as I said, they do happen in the pre-work, in the brainstorming, in all of those, that ideating period. But once it becomes time to write it, man, just write it, get it out there, and demystify it. Because if you actually get into this field, you know, you're going to be writing a book a month, a book every 2 months, you know, or a screenplay every 6 months. And so you got to get those things out of the way. If you were an artist, they say you got to draw 1,000 bad pages till you draw a good one. And you maybe don't have to write 1,000 screenplays, but you definitely got to get a bunch done. And there's no need to wait for that.
Yeah, very well said. I mean, I've been trying to work hard at it. Like, I'm 5 screenplays in. I'm about to, well, I've already written the first part of a 3-part superhero film trilogy.
That's great.
It's all about the end of the world, so I have a lot to draw from nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, will it be too real for people? But that's
Yeah.
You shouldn't worry about that. You should write what's important to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been taking a lot of inspiration from 2020. And I've got one more question.
Sure.
At what age did you decide you wanted to be a writer, and why?
Well, I sort of spoiled that in my answer to the previous thing.
Oh yeah, true.
But yeah, so around when I was 12, I first decided I was going to try to break into comics, and it was because it was actually I'd like danced around it a couple times. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but it was when there was an article in my local newspaper about like Superman's new electric costume and never going back, new powers and all that. It was never going to change back, and I was 12, so I definitely believed that. But what's fascinating to me is there was like a Marvel bullpen style conversation, even though it was DC, with people talking about how they came up with all the new powers and the looks and this sort of creative roundtable. And I had dabbled in art and I can draw slowly, but I really realized that sort of raw and like quick on the draw ideas and creativity that came from the writing and editorial side was really what was for me. So it was that article. I started researching online how to write comic scripts. Of course, I had to start going to conventions to actually learn that. I got some of my first notes from folks at CrossGen Comics, which doesn't even exist anymore, but I actually still have friends from that period. And I just started. I mean, I was pitching Image when I was like 14 years old. I was pitching DC when I was like 14 years old. I'm sure they didn't take me seriously. I'm sure they didn't take me seriously, but I did it. And I just knew that is what I love, the collaboration of comics. I think it's why I don't tend to do super intense like 80-page scripts for a 20-page book that tells you what's going on inside the coffee mug, inside the fridge, in the other room. Because I love collaboration. I love the push and pull and trusting my collaborators and creating something that's better than any of us could do on our own. So, and that's something you can really only get in comics. And that's why I'm here.
That's what this show is about. It's about learning from other creatives about how they do their craft and how we can work with each other.
Absolutely.
And I just thought of one more question.
Sure.
I'm gonna put you on the spot. Is there anything you can tell us about any of your unknown projects, like non-public projects?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I had hinted. Sorry about that. I had hinted that I'm doing a bunch of new genres. And so, yeah, I mean, you will see in, well, probably 2021, maybe 2022. I don't know. That all depends on the art teams, but there's a diversity in the type of books that I'm doing that I've really never had before. As I said, young adult fantasy, I've never done that. Horror, I've never really done that, especially not like slasher grindhouse horror. I'm doing my version of, like, as I said, an Evangelion or like a Voltron book, but it's me and it's comic. So it's also going to be like a Kurt Swan type Superman book that I'm super excited about. You're going to see me probably next year doing books with one of my biggest idols that, if you follow me online, like we've appeared together, we're friends. One or two of those people, like two of my huge influences, we're working on projects together. And that's even before we get into the fact that hopefully I'll be lining up this monster blockbuster book that I've been writing with a friend. And my book, Kill a Man, which is announced a while back, but it had seen some delays, is finally coming out. And for me, like, that's the greatest thing I've ever done. And I can't wait for everyone to see it. That's hopefully going to be out by the end of the year. So there's a lot.
Expectations.
Well, we're trying, but I'm incredibly proud of it. I was going over the lettering proof within the week. I can't, what are days anymore? But I was definitely going in within the week.
Sounds really great. I'm really excited.
Hey, man.
Well, what I'm trying to do every time I bring on a guest, are there any questions you want to ask me?
Oh, interesting. Well, I actually like that challenge. No one has done that to me before. Well, so you're doing this podcast and talking about comics, bringing everyone together.
Yeah.
And what interests me is, we're so focused on like a specific few genres. So, but back in the day, like in the 30s or 40s, there was a much higher proliferation of different genres. So you're a younger reader, probably younger than me. I'm 35.
Yeah.
What genre do you think can make a comeback that people just like, people think is played out? Whether it's romance, whether it's sports books, whether it's Westerns, you could have in the heyday of newsstand comics, everything got a book. And these days it's mostly superheroes, crime, science fiction, so on and so forth. And there are some notable exceptions, by the way. I don't mean to pigeonhole the entire industry, but these things used to be huge. So what's ready for a comeback for you as a reader?
Okay, I've got a few. Okay. As you said, I want a shadow book.
Well, that's still a superhero book. We're talking genres that have been out of fashion for years.
Lone Ranger.
Okay, now you got me. We're getting closer.
Which you could also tie in the Lone Ranger to the Green Hornet book that's out right now, which I've been following because I love that character. Because Britt Reed is, kind of a little bit distantly related to the Lone Ranger. I'm just a really big fan of the pulp heroes. Like I'm a big fan of pulp heroes like the Lone Ranger. I used to watch the show, the black and white show, and I was not a fan of the movie.
There could have been some more work done on it for sure.
Yeah, I think the problem with movies like that, they just don't really get the character. Plus he's such an old character. There's not a lot of people who would.
Well, I think, the thing is, a lot of folks tend to think there's something to be fixed, quote unquote, with older characters. But as you show with the Shadow, it's not that the character has, or I hope to show with the Shadow, like it's not that the character has to change. The way that the time responds to them has to change.
It's kind of all about putting old characters into a new context. I think that's the way to put older characters into our new world, because so much has changed, obviously.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I just think you have to be unabashed in some ways. Like what I like about something, I don't really like self-deprecating genre films. I love the Fast and Furious movies. That's not because they're quote unquote good, but they do know that they're like over the top action blockbusters, and they don't feel ashamed of it. Like so often in the mid 2000s, you would have characters who seem to like know that they were in an action movie and it was a little lame. The thing is that the people that are going to consume that content, it's not lame to them. So when you do stuff like that, you're essentially calling your readership or viewership lame.
Like
And I
like
find that strange.
like superhero media has felt kind of self-deprecating at times, you know, mocking comic book costumes, um, basically making fun of everything from the comics. Like a lot of the costumes from the Netflix shows, you know, portraying it goofily and basically that they're ashamed of what the characters were.
Well, I mean, and to me, like comics are ridiculous. That's why I love them. My favorite book is Flex Mentallo, which is a book about how the absurdity of comics will save you from cynicism. So,
Yeah, I mean, we should celebrate ridiculousness.
oh, I completely agree. I completely agree. So, um, I think that, and I think you'll see, like I'm shocked how great the Doom Patrol show is, for example, and it leans all the way in to the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah,
So, but I think that yeah, you could see those pulp characters make a comeback. I think,
I would also be interested in like a maybe like a noir comic.
hmm well, I mean, yeah, and you'll see things like that, like neo noir. I mean, you see it in things like Blade Runner 2049 or a movie like Brick. But I think that you can, I mean, you're going to see I think you're going to see a proliferation of new types of genres because they're going to be, I should say, genre takes, new variations, because you're going to be growing it out of the anxieties of this year. Like work's going to come out that looks like no other version of that type of story has looked before because everything is changing in our brains with the way that we've been stuck inside. So I think you're going to see a really fascinating shift in the way people talk about things and the way these genres are presented. And, the pulps, film noir, the world is smaller. It lives in the shadows in those genres. And so
Yeah.
the world feels really small right now because we can't leave our houses. So I think you're going to see interesting things like that.
Plus,
Pop back up.
I think we've already been in a bit of a like with noir, it's always been a like disillusionment, and I feel like much recently, I mean, even most of the 21st century, we've been in a disillusionment with our world.
Well, I mean, a lot has happened in the past 20 years, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree. But yeah, no, it's fun asking. I've never been asked to ask the interviewer a question, so you kept me on my toes. I like it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions before I say goodnight?
Oh, I mean, I burned my one, man. But if you have anything else for me, I'm happy to hit it before I get off.
I think I'm good. I'd love to do this again further down the line.
We absolutely can. All right. Yeah. Once let's talk. I mean, either once the first couple arcs of of Commandos in Crisis have wrapped up, or once Killaman comes out towards the end of the year, I'd love to talk to you again.
That would be great. Okay, so, and here is the end of the first episode of The Late Night Nerd with Batman Ultra 7 and our wonderful, wonderful guest, Steve Orlando.
Thank you again, my friend.
You have a good one.